Today, we're excited to have the preeminent biographer of the Smiley family present to you about this important milestone in the history of Smiley Library. His master's thesis became the book The Smileys, Alfred, Albert, and Daniel, published in 1969. He became the founding archivist and head of special collections in 1972, having recently earned his PhD in history from Claremont Graduate School. In 1986, he was appointed director of A.K. Smiley Public Library, a position he held until his retirement at the end of 2012, a 40-year career. He's authored numerous books on regional history, the Smiley family, and their resort in New York, Mohonk Mountain House. Dr. Larry Burgess, welcome to the Resilient Redlands webinar series.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Hello, everyone, and I'm delighted to be asked to speak on this particular occasion. And maybe to have a calming effect, we'll put up the first slide or picture of the Mohonk Mountain House Resort in New York that is now more than 150 years in the hands of the Smiley family. This talk is actually representing an entire year of Smiley Library's life. A number of people within the library and the board had planned a year-long series of programs, events, publications about the Centennial of Daniel Smiley's gift and that of his wife, Effie, to the library of the children's wing. Alas, the pandemic has stopped and jettisoned a number of best-laid plans. And so in a sense, you're stuck with me to try and cram it all in of what we had hoped to engender of enthusiasm for this great year and this wonderful celebration of the Children's Room's Centennial. Okay, it all begins with Daniel and Effie Smiley. The phrase that you could apply to the previous slide actually was true. Locals in Redlands, once the Smileys hit town in 1889, and until the death of Daniel in 1930, had a particular comment, and it always was, the Smileys made their money at Mohonk and spent it in Redlands. That literally is true. I think the descendants of the family who may or may not be watching this are probably weeping by now as I remind them of that great siphon of money that came to benefit our community. Daniel Smiley is the lesser known of the brothers, and for 30 years he had guided Mohonk as Albert K. Smiley, his brother's right hand. And then with Albert's death in 1912, Daniel assumed the entire direction of everything in the East and all of the responsibilities for the philanthropies here in the West. His helpmate and partner, an unspeakably gentle and wonderful soul, Effie Newell Smiley, was at his side in all of these tasks and with great approval. And even after her husband's death, she would come out to winter in Redlands to see their daughter, Ruth Smiley Sanborn, who at that time owned a Canyon Crest Park that the twin brothers had developed in 1889-90. And Effie would come to library board meetings as a friend, and she would take a great interest in things Redlands in this community. If it sounds like I'm a pom-pom carrier and booster, it's because I am. It's a remarkable team. There's a wonderful family portrait that is taken at Mohonk Lake in the early 1900s. In the center is Albert K. Smiley. To your right, to our right, standing with the beard, is Daniel Smiley. To Daniel's right is the daughter, Ruth Smiley. And at Daniel's sitting in the chair is Effie Smiley, his wife. Behind Albert in the middle is Hugh Smiley, is A.K. Smiley Jr. Let's don't get into the confusion of that name. And then moving left, looking up, is Francis Smiley, and then Hugh Smiley, the oldest brother, and seated is Albert's wife and partner in all good works, Eliza Smiley. So there they are, and it is through this heritage that this talk is formed. Now, if you look at the next slide, you'll see the pride and glory, as Alfred Smiley, the other twin brother, called the library, this wonderful structure, the A.K. Smiley Public Library. So when it was built, there was a limited site for children's activities, but very limited. And this is 1898 pictures that you're seeing. And it was quite clear by 1906 that the library had to be expanded. And so the reference wing was added. And then it became clearer upon Albert Smiley's death, literally on his deathbed, as he talked with his brother about things of family and love and benefaction and who would carry on, that the children of Redlands needed a more expansive room. The reference wing in 1906 had provided a downstairs one. We'll have a picture of that later, but it's pretty remarkable. Patience is a great gift in any family, particularly where you have extraordinarily involved and intelligent people, each with their own peculiar set of traits, and all of whom are seeking to make a consensus, which is very Quaker, of the direction to take the family's benefactions. Inside the library, there is a clock. And that clock, I smile every time I passed it. For 40 years, I smiled as I would pass it, because we came across a letter early on that we'd acquired, and it's from Daniel to Albert. Now, Albert in 1898 had already gone into debt, $60,000. It's about $1.5 million in today's money, in debt, I say, to build the library and give it as a gift to the people of Redlands. It was to Daniel to pay off all of this and manage the debt. But even Daniel could get exasperated with his older brother. Remember, the twins were 27 years older than Daniel. I'll explain that in a minute. And so Daniel almost was like a son to them. And Albert and he had a very close and deeply bonded friendship. Well, guess what? Daniel writes Albert and says, "Look, I appreciate all that thee is doing for thy benefaction in Redlands, but a clock as a gift to thy gift? ? In other words, really, when are you going to stop? You're doing enough." That clock has such a gentle ring and has served a great welcoming purpose, however, since the building opened in 1898. All right, let's move on to a picture of Smiley Heights. And we'll leave it here for a minute, and I want to talk about how in the world Daniel got involved in his twin brothers' enterprises. Albert dies in 1912, having been preceded in death in 1903 by Alfred. Okay, so what does that make? How does that mean the charity? Well, Daniel really stood no choice. When Alfred died, Albert, as you know, twins are very close, and it's a major disruption when they are separated, either voluntarily or involuntarily by geography. And in projects, separation proves unhappy for them because of the collaborative nature of twinness. And guess what? When Alfred died, Albert decided he could not carry on the memories and the memories of love between the two, and he ordered the park sold and even had a brochure printed, listed it with the local realtor in town, John P. Fisk, who became a very good friend. And you know, then he got second thoughts, and he decided that no, he would buy his late brother's half from his 6 children and widow. That news obviously was quite a hit over the head to Daniel, because this meant $150,000, which was almost $3.5 million in today's money, that he was going to have to come up with out of the Mohonk business to spend in Redlands. He did it. He did it without grousing, with great patience and fortitude. And by 1926, that entire debt, with interest every year that it was existing, was finally paid off by Daniel, and all of Alfred's children got their shares. Hence, making it at Mohonk and spending it in Redlands for this beautiful 200-acre, world-famous park, which was their home, is an example of what we're talking about as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Children's Room. Daniel, in taking on his interests of the brothers, took on his own interests in Redlands itself. He was not out here very often until Albert's death in 1912, occasionally, but not very often, because he stayed at Mohonk to work in the winter when it was closed to get things done for the season. I thought you'd be interested in how wrong people can be. So I'm going to quote something I wrote in the biography of the twins in 1969. I wrote, "Daniel, among the three brothers, left far less of a written record for us to assess interests." Well, that's before I went back to Mohonk. This was in 1969, and in 1971 I went back, and it was that year that I discovered that I wish I could rip that page out even today. Daniel Smiley was the most prolific letter writer of either of his twin brothers, kept meticulous notes, and literally there are several thousand letters that are in the Mohonk archives on all kinds of subjects, instructions, and family meetings. It's a remarkable gathering of huge correspondence. So Burgess missed the mark on that one. One of the great phrases that Daniel used privately and to close friends in accepting the duties of Redlands philanthropy was that it would be nothing short of mean and sordid spiritedness to not assume the benefactions that his brothers so loved. So in 1898, he helped find the money for the library building, again the expansion in 1906. In 1920, he provides the children's room. He has a chuckle in 1926 when the library board contacts him and says they hoped he wouldn't be offended that he would not be able to build a new wing where the assembly room of the library is today, a new wing, but that Eldridge Lyon, a library trustee, had asked if he might fund it. Daniel later remarks, "I'm so pleased that Mr. Lyons had such stewardship, but no, I wasn't offended that I didn't have to pay for it." In 1929, he made a statement the year before his death that, "I regret I cannot do more for Redlands than I am able to get around more as well with its people." He delighted in the Rotary Club celebration in the early 1920s, where he and Effie and family were guests, and people reminisced about why Patron Saints Day on March 17th began, how Daniel was carrying it on. It pleased him that the town expressed such a wonderful interest. And so I have to tell you, that was a red letter day. And I love the quote, "What greater benefaction than a library building can there be? It provides a home for the People's University," as one of the speakers said. And I know that Daniel Smiley was beaming with pride and pleasure on that. Well, let me also say that in 1927, in speaking to the Kiwanis Club, he gave one of the most detailed discussions about parks, open space, and the acquisition of land. And he counseled the people of Redlands to not only maintain their parks, but to create more of them. As population would grow, they were going to need it. He also counseled to acquire open space while you can before it is all built, and thus have regrets that you've impoverished the future rather than enriched it. He was right on point, and the lesson was in some great parts followed, but just drive around today and you'll see that I'm afraid it fell on more ears that were deaf than listening. Effie Smiley was a remarkable woman. She was born in China, Maine. They both were born about 1855, and she was in school with Daniel early on at the Vassalboro School in Maine, and so they knew each other. It was not a shock when Effie Newell grew up that she continued to know the Smiley family, and that ultimately the two of them would fall in love. A woman of great capabilities. She bore 4 children and accepted beautifully all the responsibilities for raising them in the Quaker tradition and raising them well. She wrote hundreds of letters to hotel guests, to friends, to associates in philanthropies and causes that the Mountain House at Mohonk sponsored, to people in Redlands whom she got to know, and to social engagements that she presided over that were also in the hundreds. Visiting Redlands almost every year after the death of her husband to visit their daughter Ruth, she came to take a particular pride and pleasure in having dozens and dozens and dozens of admirers and friends here in Redlands. I wonder if we might take a look at a brochure, which I think we've got as slide 21, to show you the influence of California. Here they are in 1924, opening the 55th season. But look in the middle, where courtesy, hospitality, and home-like atmosphere prevail, where the allurement and beauty of California and the quaintness and charm of Europe and more can be found at Lake Mohonk Mountain House, Daniel Smiley, proprietor. So maybe at least one thing that we gave them, while not money, was a chance to look at a different lens from the West Coast and to see how that lens could be incorporated in some ways at the beauty of the East Coast at Mohonk Mountain House. A few years ago, we had a gala at the library, and a number of the Smiley family came out. And here you see on your right, Eric Smiley Gullickson with his arm around his cousin, Tom Smiley. And the two of them are direct descendants of Daniel Smiley. In front is one of Eric's children, his wife, Robin, in the colorful dress of pansies, the Smiley Brothers' favorites. And then we can go on down the list of other members, all the way from New York, thrilled, delighted, and so supportive of the library that their great-great-grandfather helped expand, and the wing that he gave in 1920. The library was always a focal point for the Smileys to be photographed at or near or in front of. And in this case, you have a 1910 photo with Albert K. Smiley to the left with his hat, Effie Smiley in the middle, Daniel Smiley on the right, and Archie Collette, their driver, in that 1910 Cadillac that actually they used over and over again for other purpose. And it was retired in about 1934 with 300,000 miles on it. Well, anyway, they loved the library, and there you see it as it looked in those days. Arriving at Redlands at the train station was always a delight, because if you look in back of Albert Smiley on the right, you'll see the orange relief in casting, plaster casting, reminding the people as they got off that they were in the golden land of fruit and the wonderful magic about navel oranges. And there you have on the left, Daniel, a friend of theirs, Mrs. Brown, and then Albert. And I think this was in 1912. Sadly, Albert would be gone. This was, I think, in April, and he would die in Redlands in December of 1912. So it's one of the last sort of public photographs. It's a sweet picture, and I think what's sweeter is the building is not only still there, but it's been beautifully restored and will soon see service once again for a railroad. So never count historical change as change. It sometimes just comes right back, but only more expensively. There is a little letter, a note in the newspaper about Christmas, and it talks about an interesting benefaction. The municipal Christmas tree, which is to be erected at the Triangle downtown, was brought down from Smiley Heights this morning. And Daniel Smiley had to love Redlands because those deodar cedars that the Smileys brought literally from around the world near the Himalayas, one of them was still beautiful, but was showing its age. And so he gave permission to have it chopped down and put for the town Christmas tree. There's also another article that I want to allude to. I think it's slide 26, Nathan, if that helps, if I've got it numbered right. It's about, back to that newspaper article of Daniel. And if it doesn't show, it's not a problem. Yeah, there it is. We talked about this, but there's something I wanted to add. The Smileys made friends in Redlands that continued to support their efforts. In that column to your left, you'll see the library board, and I just want to say, Kirk Field was also the Smileys' private family attorney, and he's the one that drew up all the legal agreements as these properties were turned over to the city. Stuart Hodgkiss was a great benefactor as well in town, very intellectual guy. And he and Daniel Smiley were close personal friends as well, as was J.J. Prendergast, who was important in the water history and citrus history of Redlands. And Major Cook, who had moved to Redlands for his health, came to know the Smileys and support them. And then Lyman King, who was the editor of the Redlands Facts for a long period of time and later became a California state senator, very influential and very important person. And you'll note that the next paragraph says the tables were decorated with the Smiley flowers, the pansies. That was their favorite flower. They liked that the pansy was the English version of the French friendship. And so that meant a lot to them. And soon you'll be looking out at the front bed of the library as the new crop of pansies will be planted for the winter in readiness for the March 17th celebration. If we move on, there is, I think on the next slide, a letter that I want to share with you. Daniel Smiley was a member of the, well, how do I say it? He was on all sorts of university boards. I think I can remember them. The one board that he spent so much time with as chair of the board was Vassar College. He was on the board of his alma mater, the Quaker school, Haverford, in Pennsylvania. He had served for a period of time on the board at Swarthmore. He was on the board at the New Paltz Normal School, today the SUNY New York at New Paltz, where there is a hall named for the Smiley family. And in 1917, he was asked if he would be interested in serving on the board and helping the University of Redlands. He did. He regretted that he couldn't be at all of the board meetings. They didn't have Zoom in those days. And so he took it on, but he wanted to make sure that he was a good contributor. When he died in 1930, the trustees wrote this letter. I want to just excerpt a couple of quotes. In his death, our university has lost an honored and valued trustee and a very dear and respected friend. Elected in 1917, he served until the date of his death. His name and personality added luster and strength to the roster of the university, while his broad experience as an educator and businessman gave his advice and counsel unusual weight and importance. For 17 years, He not only carried on the affairs and policies of his brothers, but he's shown a keen interest in all of the affairs of our community and university. Scholar, educator, philanthropist, humanitarian, his life has been dedicated to making the world a safer, saner, and better place to live. He was a genial, loyal friend, a kindly, generous citizen, and a good and lovable man. University of Redlands, signed Madison Jones, President. It's a very meaningful and moving tribute of his effect in those early days upon the University of Redlands and his advice for it, including a small benefaction that he gave as well. The children's room before the one that was built by Daniel was really quite a nice place. It was in the basement of the reference wing. If you walk down to the east side of the esplanade of the library in the front, you'll see a staircase that goes down into a basement. That was the entrance of the children's room. Now, many people have said, well, that was typical. The children should be seen but not heard, and therefore, etc. I actually think it was the most convenient space without having to create new walls in the existing structure. And it was really a very nice room. You'll see it was very well appointed. But the kids of Redlands had outgrown it in only about 7 years. And so that's why Daniel Smiley decided to give the money. Let's talk about the beginnings of the children's wing, which we have in the next slide of its ultimate design. Daniel Smiley, upon Albert's death, had agreed to provide a $10,000 grant to the city to build a new wing, largely for the children, a little bit also for reference. Then came along World War I, the changes of business at the Mountain House that created, and then the recession of 1919 after the war had ended was a severe recession. It was very hard to get labor, it was very hard to get supplies of materials, and so it had been postponed. As he wrote, I'm significantly limited in my own personal plans and desires. So he asked the city for patience. And he also knew that Canyon Crest Park was going to be a continued expense. Well, by 1919, the city decided to award a contract because they had indeed received Daniel Smiley's $10,000. The contract was for $11,000, and they said, well, this won't be a problem because the city will pick up the charges over the $10,000 gift. If only that had been true. I'll explain in a moment. The high labor costs and the material shortages caused them by September of 1919 to decide that city engineer George Hinckley should be the point man and be in charge of the project. That was fine with Daniel, but by agreement made with the city, he had the right of review of the plans and every change, as well as suggestions that might come along during the process. On November 21st, the city announced that the new wing would be 100 feet long and 26 feet wide with a full basement. And the plans were approved, but Daniel, ever the futurist, said to the city, even if it should cost more money, and if I had to participate, do you think that it not ought to be wider than 26 feet? Because in the future, you'll find growing pains. How many times I thought of those words during my years at the library. It's a fabulous room, but we sure could have used 4 extra feet. Plans were submitted and given to the council. Hinckley was appointed, and this was in November of 1919. And then came the interesting development. Only one firm bid on it, one firm. Fortunately, it was the Taylor Construction and Brickyard Company that had built a number of buildings here in Redlands, and the bid seemed reasonable. It met the $11,000 and change, and so the Taylor brothers were given the contract. Thank goodness somebody bid on it, or we wouldn't be having this Centennial. On March 30th, 1920, the board and the city, along with Hinckley, took a trip to Santa Barbara because they had heard accounts of how impressive the young readers' room was for the children of Santa Barbara, with the latest of this and the latest of that. And plus, Santa Barbara adhered to the philosophy that the library board and Mr. Hinckley, and that philosophy was, it is important that the library be the center of culture for Redlands. They learned a lot from that trip, and you'll see here in the completed wing, this is the 1920. Let me give you a little description of what you're looking at. You're seeing tables that are still in use today and chairs in the 1920 wing. You're seeing a closed door on the right. That was the children's own private restroom. The fireplace, alas, was removed many, many years ago when the fireplaces were discarded as a concept. Can you imagine the risk management today of an open fire? And yet it worked quite well for all those years without any problems with the children, staff, or parents and visitors. And you see the beautiful hardwood floor, which now for sound purposes has been covered. And you'll see the beautiful beams on the top. It was pretty extraordinary. Over the years, this room saw lots of activities. And so as we go to slide 30, we'll just scroll through a few of these. Here are children's activities where costumes and different themes were involved, and they're out and back of the children's wing. You'll see in front of the library in some later years how they were lined up for a specific program that involved the park that came along with the library. And so it meant a lot to see this happening. In 1999, we had a special celebration. The Historical Society decided that Daniel Smiley's picture, which had hung in the room from its beginning, ought to have a plaque as well to let people know that it was the Daniel Smiley wing. Oh, and by the way, Mr. Smiley had to give another $1,000 and another $500 for equipment because the city reneged on its total promise to pay all the expenses over the amount he donated. I think he was pretty used to that kind of possibility and understood the peculiarities of city government. In this picture, I'm on the left. Tim Sanborn is next to me. A. Keith Smiley, Bert Smiley, of the third generation, is pictured. And two other people, Liz Beglin on the right, and one of the Smileys from descendants from the Alfred Smiley side in Riverside. So that was in 1999. There's another wonderful picture of the reception that was held there. And there you see Bert standing next to his wife, Nina Smiley. Regrettably, I have to tell you that Bert died last year, right in the prime of all kinds of projects that he was doing as president of Smiley Brothers. And then in back, you will see in the mustache and tie, the president of the library board currently, William D. Hatfield. Beside him, the late news editor for the Facts, Richard West. Ben Osmond, a descendant of the Osmond pioneer family in Redlands, partially hidden. And behind the gentleman in the blue shirt is Bill Adams, longtime reporter with the Sun and a volunteer extraordinaire at the San Bernardino County Museum. And in front is our host for today, Nathan Daniel Gonzalez, just having started as a part-time and ultimately full-time person at Smiley Library, fresh from graduate school at University of California, Riverside. Well, moving on, times change and people change, and these are shots that we'll go through of programs that have happened over the years, reading programs, lectures, visiting authors, musicians, all kinds of things for the kids of Redlands. And there they are, even doing special art and finger painting. Of course, the ubiquity of refreshments and cookies. And then came the pandemic. And then came, as you'll see, 200 or more cars lined up, stretching clear back to Trader Joe's. stands in front of the library handing out books in a cavalcade of families and kids, more than 250 cars, and as many kids. And then a picture of Charlotte Huck. And that leads into my final thought. So Daniel Smiley was a visionary, as were his twin brothers. And they believed that the Redlands, people of Redlands, would take up the cause. It's an infectious kind of legacy that they left in a positive social way. I must honestly tell you that I think the children's room, the original title, is just fine. The young reader's room, the present title, is just fine. But in many ways, I think it should be called the room of the future, because that's what our children are. They are the future. And it's in that room that they learn the magic of reading. I'm speaking because my wife's late aunt, Charlotte Huck, an internationally known figure in children's literature with one of the great textbooks that she produced when at the Ohio State University, ultimately captured the vision herself when she moved to her retirement years in Redlands to be near her nieces. I got to know her very well, and I was taken completely by surprise when a group put a window that she was present for in her honor in the children's room, which is from Charlotte's Web, which was one of her favorite children's books. It's a great stained glass window if you've not seen it. Upon her death in Redlands, she left hundreds of her private collection of children's books to the library, a bequest that can be used for programming or purchase of materials. A conference of children's literature at the university that the Smiley Library is a participant of, and that the current librarian, Pam Martinez, is active on that board. And she also captured the vision. This woman from Northwestern via Ohio State to Redlands leaves a legacy that it's my intent to push upon you today. The 100th Centennial would have honored people like Charlotte and people like those that use the Heritage Room, which I mean the Children's Room, excuse me, which is the next slide, I believe, of how it looks today. This room beckons us. It beckons Daniel Smiley's faith and Charlotte Huck and hundreds of people in between, that we continue to honor our legacy, our children. So there's always room for benefaction. It can be as volunteers. It can be in small numbers of funds to help with programs. It can be as gifts of books. And it can be through your generosity, through your estates, in your wills, for programs, for publications, for outings, for great speakers, for terrific readings for our kids. It's always needed. No city, as Clarence White said, lives by taxes alone. And believe me, as we know from this pandemic and the current state of the city, we'll need everything we can get to make sure this is a bright future. So, to all of you kind enough to listen to this talk, I thank you for being here. And to the Smiley family, gratitude for all that they did. And then to the people of Redlands that picked it up, double gratitude to you for keeping the legacy, the spirit, the dream, the reality for the children of Redlands going. Now, I don't know, Nathan, if we have any questions, if there's time. I think I bleated on enough here.
Thank you, Larry, for that great presentation and helping us honor the 100th anniversary of the Young Readers Wing, the Daniel Smiley Wing. We do have one question, and the question is, who donated the Leo Politi mural and how much did it cost?
It's a great story. The Leo Politi mural came about because we were tipped off in Redlands that he was speaking at a program at the Mission Inn, and that he had brought a number of the paintings he had done. This must have made the Riverside people unhappy, of Redlands. And so a group of friends of the library were there. They went up immediately and talked to him and said, we've got to have those paintings. And moreover, we think that you should do a mural for the children's room. And so it was the library friends, in combination with two of their members who gave personal benefaction, and with support from the Smiley Library, that mural went up. Leo came out and then surprised us all by saying he would donate all of the pictures of Redlands. So a number of his paintings rotate in that room, and there are others, but the mural is a true focal point. Again, a sweet-souled, self-effacing, wonderfully creative, delightful man that, though from LA, left a great legacy here for Redlands. So there's your long answer to a short question.
The next question asks, why is Daniel so much younger?
Well, Daniel's, the mother of the twins died, and Daniel Smiley remarried. And when he remarried, he and his wife, rather late for Daniel, but she was considerably younger, had a child, and it was Daniel. And it was 27 years after the twins were born. So that's the explanation, half brother, and also the explanation of why his two twins sort of took him on almost as like their own kid. As they got older, the communication and the rapport between the three of them was really quite remarkable.
And that's it. So Larry, thank you once again for joining us this morning and sharing with us your breadth of knowledge about these important people and, of course, this important place.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Yes, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. We hope you stay safe and well, and that we'll see you again sometime soon.